The infamous Bermuda Triangle is not the only area on Earth, and not even the only triangular area, that is the site of unexplained phenomena and strange happenings. In fact, there are actually several triangular areas in the United States alone that are known to also have some strange qualities. One of these triangular areas is the Bennington Triangle in the northeast state of Vermont. The Bennington Triangle has long been the site of extremely strange disappearances, strange murders, UFO sightings, Bigfoot sightings, unexplainable plane crashes, and just a slew of strange lights, sounds, and smells. So today we are going to unpack the Bennington Triangle, and I am going to share with you guys all of the crazy stories, all of the lore surrounding this area that goes back to the Native Americans and their beliefs about this area, and we are just going to try to figure out what could be happening here, even though, I mean, I guess there really isn't an answer other than just theories at this point. If this is your first time on my channel, welcome, welcome. My name is Marissa and this is my channel Life from Mars. I make new videos every single week about different unexplained mysteries, and I do all things unexplainable, mysterious, and magical on this channel. So if that sounds nice to you, you should go ahead and maybe consider subscribing, you know, if you like this video. But anyway, let's get into the craziness of the Bennington Triangle. So like I mentioned, this area is actually centered in Vermont, specifically around a mountain called Glastonbury Mountain. So the actual Bennington Triangle area is comprised of Glastonbury Mountain and also several cities. So it's the towns of Bennington, Woodford, and Shaftesbury, as well as two kind of smaller ghost towns that I guess are kind of just abandoned, but those are the cities of Somerset and Glastonbury. So all of this strange phenomena seems to be centered in this area. Not surprisingly, and as is often the case with these kinds of locations, the indigenous people to this region had their own beliefs about it, and they actually believed that this area was cursed. So specifically, the indigenous tribe that lived there was the Abenaki tribe, and they were part of the Algonquin Nation. Part of what they believed was that their god lived upon Glastonbury Mountain, and they essentially had a couple of different legends pertaining to Glastonbury Mountain and the supposed curse. Their legends warned of a malevolent stone that lived upon Glastonbury Mountain and would open up and swallow anyone who stepped upon it. They also believed the area was cursed because the four winds met there, and they also changed directions erratically, which is actually 100% true, by the way. The winds do meet there coming from different directions, and it does cause the weather to be very erratic. They also told stories of very large, hairy, half-human, half-animal creatures that were said to threaten the area and its inhabitants. Needless to say, the native people did not live in this area. They refused to settle in this area. The one thing that they did do was bury their dead at the base of Glastonbury Mountain because, like I said, they believed that their god lived at the top, but they would not dare step any foot on the mountain or even stay in that area for longer than they needed to. And just to top it all off, because they did bury their dead there, there's also been a lot of reports of hauntings. So, you know, just add that one to the list as well. So without a doubt, what this area is probably best known for is the unexplainable, very mysterious disappearances that have happened here. Most people who know about this area, it's probably because of the disappearances. So first, I just want to dive into that, because that alone is just so much of what makes this area so crazy. So although the Native Americans definitely had their beliefs about the area, this was not really widely known to people or obviously really believed. As with most Native American lore, people just don't even know at this point after colonization and everything. And the modern settlers really did not even start thinking about this until 1945, when there was a series of 5 really strange strange disappearances pretty much back to back. So the first person to disappear on November 12th, 1945 was a 74-year-old hunting guide named Mitty Rivers. Mitty knew this area extremely well and was actually leading a group of 4 hunters in the woods around southwest Glastonbury. So as he was leading them back to camp, apparently he kind of got ahead of them in the trail and just kind of turned a corner and never made it back to camp. It was like 1 second he was there and then he got a little bit ahead of them, and next they just never saw him again. Now take in mind, this is the literal guide, okay? So these guys are thinking, well, I mean, this guy is guiding us. He must know where he's going. I'm sure he'll just meet us at camp. So they get back to the camp and Mitty is nowhere to be found. And at that point, they're still not really concerned because, I mean, this is not a guy that would just get lost. It was literally his job to guide people through this area. There would be no reason for him to veer off or, you know, it didn't even make sense that it would be possible for him to get lost. But unfortunately, Mitty Rivers would never return, and there was eventually a very extensive search for him. Over 300 concerned locals would participate in this search, and Fort Devens in Massachusetts even deployed some soldiers from the army to help with the search. But no trace of Mitty was ever found. They combed through the wilderness extensively for over 8 days, and the only thing that they were able to find that could even be possibly related to Mitty was that they found a rifle cartridge, which was from the same rifle that they knew he had and had on him that day. So in theory, this could have possibly been a cartridge from Mitty's rifle, but even then, there's no way to know for sure. It just so happened to be the same rifle that he owned. But was this connected with his disappearance? Like, did he shoot his gun for some reason? That is obviously not really clear. There was also absolutely no evidence of there being any kind of animal attack or anything like that, and ultimately his body would never be found. And honestly, guys, his disappearance was so unexplainable that even after the search, there was a lot of people who genuinely believed that he would probably eventually resurface because they knew how skilled he was with the woods. You know, the fact that he knew these mountains so well, had lived there for so long. They thought there's no way he couldn't find his way out if he had somehow gotten lost. And even then, it just, once again, didn't even make sense how he could have even gotten lost. So that was the first disappearance, Mitty Rivers, in 1945. Just over a year later, on December 1st, 1946, another disappearance would take place. Now, this was probably the most famous of these disappearances of the time, and it was of 18-year-old college student Paula Weldon. On December 1st, 1947, Paula Weldon decided to go on a hike on Long Trail Road. Now, I forgot to mention in Mitty Rivers' story that is where he was last seen. They were in this area called Hell's Hollow, but that trail was Long Trail Road. This is the exact same trail that Paula Weldon went missing on a little over a year later. So that day, Paula was wearing a bright red jacket that was very bright, very noticeable, and made a lot of people pay attention. And there was a lot of people who witnessed and reported seeing her that day. This included an employee from a store in Bennington who said to have given her directions, as well as an elderly couple who were about 100 yards behind her throughout the hike. So no one was really worried about Paula until she didn't go to class the next morning as she was supposed to at Bennington College. So once people realized that Paula was legitimately missing, there was another huge search conducted, and this one had over 1,000 people. This one really got media attention, especially because she was so young, and so they amped up the search efforts even more. So not only were there 1,000 people, but they were also doing aircraft searches. There was a $5,000 reward, and the FBI were even participating on this case. And in a nearly similar account to that with Mitty Rivers' disappearance, the elderly couple that were behind her on the hike said that at some point she was, like I said, about 100 yards ahead of them pretty much the whole time, but at some point she kind of turned a corner and they just didn't see her after that. And in this search, no evidence or answers were ever found about what happened to Paula. The only thing that they could literally find was one footprint that they thought maybe could be Paula's because it looked like it was of a sneaker and she was wearing sneakers, but it was never even really legitimately like confirmed to be hers or even her same size or like the sneaker she was wearing. So that was just kind of like the only thing that they could find that they could even think might be possibly linked to her. But other than that, despite all of these efforts, they did not find anything, including obviously Paula. And like I mentioned, this blew up and it would ultimately be one of the most infamous missing person cases ever to happen in Vermont. Many people, including Paula's father, actually criticized the police for their lack of sophistication and kind of like ability to handle this case. And in fact, this case and this criticism actually led to the Vermont State Police founding just a couple months later. However, there was another strange aspect to this case. A waitress at a local restaurant said that she served a girl that matched Paula's appearance on the night of her disappearance. So because this was the night, you could possibly assume that maybe this was after she went on the hike, because supposedly she went on this hike in the early afternoon, meaning that if the waitress had seen her at this restaurant that night, she did not go missing on that mountain. I mean, right? Theoretically. So the waitress claimed that this girl was actually accompanied by a man who looked to be about 25 years old, who was extremely drunk and acting abusive. Apparently, this girl asked the waitress how far it was to Bennington, Vermont, and also asked where she was. She told the waitress that she had arrived with $1,000, but that it was all gone now and that she needed to get to Bennington that night. The waitress noted that this girl appeared to be dazed, but was not drinking. And although the waitress did report seeing this girl, it was never confirmed if this was actually Paula. And 3 other people besides the elderly couple that was behind her also saw Paula. Some people saw her heading towards Long Trail, and she was last seen by an area called Hunter's Rest. However, this didn't really make sense, and it was questioned whether Paula would have been even able to make it to Hunter's Rest, because this was a pretty far distance away. She would have had to cross a river, and she wasn't even really dressed appropriately for the weather. But supposedly, allegedly, this was the last place that she was witnessed. And on top of that, 3 inches of snow fell that night that she went missing. So this Hunter's Rest area was owned by a man named William Lawson. So he never witnessed Paula, but he did see something else strange. He said that the next morning, after Paula was said to have disappeared, 3 servicemen passed through the rest, and that they were also not dressed appropriately. He also said that they left a briefcase with him and said that they would be back for it, but they did not give him any kind of explanation. And by the way, guys, this was not immediately obvious to me for some reason, but servicemen back then would be the equivalent of like military people today. So basically he saw these 3 military men come through. They were not dressed for the fact that, you know, this is the middle of the mountains and it had just snowed, and they really had this kind of like cryptic attitude and left him with this briefcase. So was that connected to Paula? We don't know. There's just so many answered questions, honestly. Like, was that girl that the waitress saw Paula? Was these servicemen passing through something to do with Paula? Like, did they see Paula? We don't know. Eventually, though, it was concluded by authorities that there must have been 2 different women matching Paula's description that were on Long Trail Road that day. Basically, one of these women was Paula and one was not, and this other woman was with this man. And it is also said that that is the same woman that the waitress saw, that was not Paula, that was a different person who just so happened to kind of look like her and have been in the same area, and that they are the ones that made it to Hunter's Rest, not Paula. And it's also interesting to note that authorities did always believe that Paula was most likely killed and that foul play was probably involved, just because that was really the only explanation that made sense, is that somebody must have took her and that she was kidnapped or something happened. So that was the second disappearance of Paula Weldon. Exactly 3 years to the date of Paula Weldon's disappearance, disappearance. The exact same date, on December 1st, 1949, 68-year-old James Tedford would disappear. James was a veteran and a member of the Bennington Soldier Home. He was in St. Albans visiting relatives and returning to Bennington on the bus when he disappeared. And guys, although Paula Weldon's disappearance is probably the most well-known and at the time blew up the most, this one is without a doubt the most crazy of all of these disappearances. So like I said, this man, this 68-year-old man named James, he is living at the Bennington Soldier Home. He had left town to go visit some relatives, and now he is on his way back to Bennington on the bus. Numerous witnesses, people on the bus, and the bus driver himself all reported witnessing James Tedford on that bus. He was one of only 14 passengers on this bus, and he was there until the very last stop right before Bennington. So I mean, these people, this bus driver had just spent all of this time with him on this bus. So many people saw him in his seat, and he was there for an extended amount of time. The last stop on this bus was going to be Bennington, and people saw him on the bus the entire time. And he was believed to still be on the bus at the stop right before Bennington. However, when they got to Bennington, James was nowhere to be found. He had seemingly vanished off of this moving bus. No one had seen him get off. No one saw him at the other bus terminal, and his luggage was still on the bus. No one had seen him get off, and no one saw anything at all, including anything suspicious. James was acting perfectly normal, and there was no reason why he would disappear. But people vividly remember seeing him still on the bus when they were leaving from the last stop. And basically it seems that while the bus was traveling through the Bennington Triangle, he vanished off of a moving bus at some point. His disappearance was eventually investigated, but like I said, it was just so unexplainable and no one saw anything, so they really didn't have anything but theories. A lot of people did suspect that maybe the only thing that made sense was that he did get off at that last stop before Bennington, that people just didn't see him, that the bus driver just didn't see him get off, or that maybe he had seen a friend at the stop and just decided, you know what, I'm just gonna get off. But obviously that doesn't explain why he would leave his luggage on the bus. That just doesn't make any sense. And it obviously does seem strange that no one saw him get off and that people remember him still being on the bus. Another really weird thing about this case is that apparently James's wife had also mysteriously vanished from their home just 3 years earlier. And it was kind of a similar situation where she just was gone one day. She left all of her stuff at their home. It was never explained what happened to her. So she just also so happened to have disappeared. So no one really knows if maybe that triggered something in him and maybe he just wanted to disappear, this was a purposeful disappearance and he just didn't want people to know what was going on with him because he was kind of struggling with this disappearance of his wife. Or was his disappearance somehow linked to the disappearance of his wife? Or was it just this crazy phenomena that, is the Bennington Triangle? People didn't know, but this one just blew my mind, guys. I mean, how does a guy vanish off of a moving vehicle? Can you imagine? That is just so crazy to think about. So moving on to the next disappearance, on October 12, 1950, an 8-year-old boy named Paul Jepson went missing in this area. So Paul was actually playing in the back of his parents' pickup truck in Bennington. So apparently Paul's parents had left him alone to go tend to some pigs at this dump where they were caretakers. Now this was something that they regularly did. It's not like they were super far away from him and they figured, he's totally fine. This is the 50s. He's just chilling in the back of the pickup truck. He's good. He's gonna be okay, and they left him for a brief period. However, when they came back, Paul was nowhere to be found. After looking for him and having no luck, they would eventually report their son is missing, and once again, hundreds of people would form a search party. Bloodhounds were also brought in to try to pick up his scent, and they did follow it all the way to the base of Glastonbury Mountain, but at that point they did eventually lose his scent at a crossroads. This made a lot of people suspect that maybe he had walked over there by himself and that at this point he was maybe abducted from somebody in this kind of crossroad area. That was the best theory that they could formulate, at least, that seemed to make any kind of sense. Obviously, some people even suspected the parents. But there is something really, really weird about this one. Apparently, Paul's father had said that he found it extremely strange that apparently Paul would talk about, quote, nothing else for days, then wanting to visit the mountain in the days leading up to this incident. Apparently, he had just become obsessed with wanting to go to Glastonbury Mountain. And Paul's father basically said that this may have been a result of this lure from the mountains. And the area was searched for many, many days after his disappearances, but there were absolutely no clues found with this one. And once again, Paul was never found. And only 16 days after Paul's disappearance, a 53-year-old woman named Frida Glimcher also went missing while camping with several family members on Glastonbury Mountain. On the day of her disappearance, Frida left the campsite with her cousin Herbert to go on a hike. However, when they were just a few hundred yards from their campsite, Frida was said to have fallen and slipped into a nearby stream, soaking her clothes and shoes. So at this point, she tells her cousin Herbert that she's just going to run back to the camp real quick. At this point, they're not very far away at all. So she just tells him, you know what, let me go change into some dry clothes real quick. I'll be right back. Just wait for me here. So Herbert waited, and after she didn't return for a while, he decided to go back to camp to make sure that everything was okay. He discovered that Frida never returned back to camp. Her husband had had a hurt knee and was waiting at the campsite, and he said that she never came back. She had somehow disappeared in the distance between her cousin and her family at the campsite in broad daylight. And so once again, this was really perplexing, and it did not make sense to anybody, to her family, to authorities. Why would this woman go off path? Like, she knew exactly where she was going. It was not far at all back to the campsite. I mean, she was on a trail, right? Like, it's like you literally just have to go back the other way. And so it didn't make sense why she would veer off trail, what could have happened to her, or how she could have gotten lost. But regardless, somehow she did disappear. And again, over 400 people were searching for her. This time they had police, soldiers, firefighters, regular people. They even brought in the Massachusetts National Guard and also aircraft. So they literally brought in everything they could, right? Like, this little boy had just disappeared a couple days earlier. Had been all these disappearances. So they kind of just were like throwing more and more resources at it progressively, because at that point it was just like so many people were going missing in this area that it was just like, we have to find one of these people. And actually they would eventually find Frida, but unfortunately she was no longer alive, and they only found her body. And her body was also found in an area that had been extensively searched several times, so it wasn't really clear how she ever ended up there, especially because her body was in such a deep state of decomposition that it was impossible to tell what had happened to her or her cause of death. So Frida Glimcher was the last person to disappear in this initial string of disappearances that really got people's attention, and she was also the only one who was ever found. There is also one last disappearance I want to tell you guys about real quick, because this one really helps kind of segue into the next part of this phenomena, and that is a disappearance that actually happened before these. This one was in 1943. So you'll remember these initial disappearances started happening in 1945, this kind of string, but there was actually another one in 1943. So in 1943, a man named Carl Herrick was on a hunting trip with his cousin Henry, about 10 miles northeast of Glastonbury. At some point while they were hunting, the two became separated and Carl never returned. Henry did find Carl's body 3 days later, but it was a very bizarre scene. Apparently his ribs had punctured his lungs, and it was later determined that he was squeezed to death. Henry reported that he saw several large bear tracks around Carl's corpse, but bear experts insisted that a bear would never just squeeze a man to death, that would be extremely uncharacteristic and almost impossible. But nonetheless, he did die by being squeezed to death. So if it wasn't a bear and there wasn't bear tracks, what was it? Let's talk about the Bigfoot sightings. So there have been numerous sightings of a Bigfoot-like creature in the area of Glastonbury for at least the last 200 years. And that is just the modern sightings. Like I mentioned, the Native Americans also had stories of a half-human, half-animal creature that was very tall and hairy. Remember that? So assumingly, this is probably the same creature that people are seeing now. And obviously a lot of people do associate this creature and the descriptions of it with matching up very well with the infamous Bigfoot cryptid. However, for this specific purpose, this creature has actually been dubbed the Bennington Monster. One of the very first reported sightings happened in the early 1800s, when a stagecoach full of passengers was forced to stop on a washed out road. Apparently the driver noticed very quickly after stepping out that there were very large footprints all around the area and that they were much too large to be human. He was then allegedly attacked by a large creature that apparently pushed the entire stagecoach onto its side. The passengers apparently vividly remembered a pair of frightening glowing eyes, and then apparently after this creature attacked the driver, he just roared and ran off and disappeared into the forest. This and later sightings describe this creature or creatures as large, tall, hairy black things that were at least 6 foot or taller. So this specific 1800s incident was the most well-known kind of confrontation with this creature, but like I said, there have been many other sightings, and so it is unknown, once again, whether this is related to the other things that were happening on the mountain, whether this was related to the disappearances. I mean, could this have been the thing that squeezed Carl to death? Could this have been something that was involved in all these other disappearances, or was this completely unrelated? Were those disappearances from some other phenomena, or from some kind of like person stealing people, you know, like kidnapping people? It is unknown, but that is definitely also an aspect of the strange phenomena at the Bennington Triangle. And take in mind that although I did name like 6 different disappearances, in total there have been at least 40 confirmed disappearances to happen in this area just in the last 200 years or so. So I mean, there is a really good amount of people who have vanished from this area. And there is actually one story that is so interesting, and I feel like kind of lends an eye into what all of these other people who disappeared could have experienced. A music composition teacher at Bennington College shared his story of when he almost went missing on Glastonbury Mountain. 27-year-old Robert Singley got lost in the Bennington Triangle in October 2008. He was in Woodsford Hollow, also known as Hell Hollow, the exact same area where Paula Weldon and Mitty Rivers had gone missing. Of course, this was maybe 60 years before Robert would take this hike. Robert was really excited on this trip. He did go alone, but he really was just planning to kind of just do something really easy and just do some composing out in nature. And everything seemed totally fine at first. He walked a little bit of a distance, and once he felt like, you know, he was pretty much ready to go, he turned back around and headed back towards his car. But eventually he realized that he had already been walking for 4 or 5 miles when he should have been back at his car within about 3 miles. But he swore he was walking on the right trail. I mean, it was not complicated, right? Like I said, this long trail road, this area was pretty simple. It was just a trail that you had to follow back and forth, and he knew that he was still on the same trail and he had turned back around. You know, there was no reason for him not to trust that he was going in the right direction. However, quickly fog started to roll in and it was beginning to get dark. Robert had no compass, no GPS, not even a watch, and he even realized that his headlamp was broken, so he didn't even have a light. He would later go on to say, quote, "Right before I lost the trail, everything like crescendoed into this weird sort of dizzying confusion. It suddenly got dark and I was like, where am I? What's going on? I was totally lost." And when he was unable to locate the right trail again, he eventually decided to sit and rest under a large maple tree. It was at this point, he reported, quote, "I was like kind of drawn into the night. It was really expelling a weird sort of, I don't know, a really weird haunted energy whatever that means. And I gotta say, guys, this did kind of remind me of Paul Jepson and his father saying that he was also kind of drawn by this weird energy to the mountain. Is this the same kind of energy? Was this the same source? I don't know, but just saying. But at this point, Robert decided to try to get some sleep, but he was just way too cold and he was also getting wet, and so he could not sleep. So he decided to try to start a fire to kind of warm himself up and maybe dry off a little bit. But strangely, while he was looking for wood, he kept finding large animal bones, which don't know what that was about, but eventually he would find some dry birch and he had matches, so he was able to start a fire. And apparently all he was worried about was his fiance, and she had already called the police and he knew that she was probably super worried about him. So in the morning, Robert decides to try to walk back to his car again, although he was still feeling disoriented from the night before. And after going again for about 3 or 4 miles, he reached a wilderness sign and realized that he was almost at the peak of Glastonbury Mountain. And at this point, he was just totally confused as to where he was and how he had ended up here. He said it did not make any logical sense at all. He thought he had camped about a 1/4 mile from his car, but literally woke up about 6 or 7 miles from where he thought he was. And on his way back down the trail, he said that he passed the same maple tree that he slept under. But this time, the trail looked completely different than it had the night before. Almost like it was a completely different trail. Same maple tree, but a completely different trail. And finally, after a short while, he was eventually found by Vermont State Police. Thankfully, Robert was not another victim to the Bennington Triangle. That being said, he still does not understand what really happened, how he ended up in such a different place than he thought he was, how he ended up going in a completely different direction, and still thinks that he did not wake up in the same place that he went to sleep the night before. He says that all he really knows is that, quote, something weird happened. So who knows what that was about? Who knows, like, is there really this energy that's kind of like pulling people towards the forest, that's confusing people, that's disorienting people? Is there some kind of portal here where people are just like literally teleporting from one place to another? Could that explain how all of these people disappeared off of the middle of the trail, and how people who knew this area or knew exactly where they were going could have disappeared? I mean, it does kind of answer some questions as to at least maybe what other people who disappeared could have experienced, but it's just very interesting that we actually have an account of somebody who really did almost go missing. I mean, really was missing for like, about 24 hours. However, that is not the only weird thing. The disappearances and the Bigfoot stuff are not the only weird thing, because there also has been apparently different mysterious plane crashes. Now, the most notable of these was in 2018 when a pilot was killed in a plane crash in Bennington County. The Federal Aviation Administration said that it had lost contact with the plane when it was flying over the Bennington area. The pilot had 6 years of flying experience and was headed to Oxford, Connecticut. Officials never revealed what they thought caused the crash, but it was clear, and they did admit, that weather did not seem to be a factor and that there was no other obvious explanation. So whether there is an explanation that they know about and we just don't know or not, we might never know. And another thing about this area is that there has been repeated UFO sightings, or alleged UFOs. Specifically, Bennington residents have reported to see a lot of floating lights and glowing crafts that are reportedly silo-looking. Because of these sightings, a lot of people wonder if UFOs could be involved in the disappearances. But there are still more weird phenomena. Apparently, there's this thing where it has happened multiple times where people will hear like terrifying sounds and voices on dead air, like when they're browsing through the radio. And I was trying so hard to find a recording of this, but I could not find it. I only saw it in a couple of articles, so I don't know exactly what those sounds sounded like. I don't know what those voices were saying or like the details behind that, but apparently that's also a thing, which is just terrifying. And there's also apparently really strange smells that come from this area. And again, I was not really able to find specific information about this, but article after article mentioned that there was mysterious smells. So I don't really know specifically what kind of smells, but apparently that is is also a thing. And like I mentioned also, reportedly the base of Glastonbury Mountain is haunted, where these cemeteries are. So apparently these Native American cemeteries are also said to be haunted. Who's surprised the Native American burial ground is haunted, you know? Like, you just gotta add that one to the list. So that is kind of a general breakdown of all of the weird things and strange phenomena that encompass the Bennington Triangle. So let's talk about possible explanations and theories as to what could be happening in this area. So as far as the disappearances are concerned, there has never been any direct evidence to connect the various disappearances, other than the time of year, the time period, and the area in which they disappeared. Obviously, some people do think that maybe there was a serial killer, but obviously that doesn't explain the Native American lore, which is what other people believe, and the numerous other strange things, like, you know, maybe even if there was a serial killer, like I said, there was over 40 disappearances, and this happened over a very wide span of time. So it does not seem likely that this could just explain everything away. But a lot of people do believe in the Native American, you know, belief that the area is cursed and that this area is some kind of portal or just, you know, path or opening to just unexplainable phenomena. Some people believe, obviously, that Bigfoot really is there and that there is some kind of creature, that the Bennington monster is real, and that that could be the cause of some of this strange phenomena. But obviously, there's also a lot of people who want a more scientific explanation. So a lot of people point to the fact that there's these different contradicting, interacting wind patterns, that could make someone feel disoriented or confused as to where they're going, you know, like the wind changes and they think that they're supposed to go this way, but they end up going the wrong way, and that this could also maybe like lead to people feeling uneasy, you know, kind of explain why that one guy had that really weird experience. People think, you know, maybe this had something to do with the airplane crash. It's really difficult to know, obviously, but that is the leading theory among skeptics who don't believe in any kind of like supernatural possible, you know, explanation. And some people do say that there is reportedly possibly small cats or like cougars in the area, and that could also explain some of the disappearances, but it's really unlikely that that's the case, just because the cougars in this area were reportedly extinct before it was even settled by the modern people. And obviously a lot of people think that there is really no reason for paranormal explanations, that they're completely unfounded, and the fact that there is just such a large, vast, unexplored, uninhabitable, basically, you know, area of wilderness is enough reason to explain why people disappear. That it's simple, you know, like people just go missing in the wilderness, basically. In addition to this, the mountain is also known to have many sinkholes, which people think might also explain some of the disappearances, or even explain the Native American lore about like the stone that would open up and swallow you. Remember that? The stone that opens up and swallows people? Was that the sinkholes, or was that something else? And was that maybe what was causing people to disappear? We don't know. And the other argument is that people are unsure whether it really is just bound to this like supposed Bennington Triangle area. People note that maybe some of these occurrences happened outside of the Bennington Triangle area, so is it really just this area that's causing all these things that's like behind it? You know, a lot of people argue that it's just coincidence. So I would love to hear what you guys think. What do you think? Do you think that there's something bigger going on? Like I said, I really did just barely scratch the surface. Like, I don't want to make this video too insanely long and go into detail about all 40 of the disappearances or every single, you know, report that has been made. But obviously there is something going on here. I mean, there have just been too many occurrences. The disappearances are one thing. Obviously, it's like the plane crash could have been a one-off or whatever. The ghost sightings could be something. The weird radio signals, like the Bigfoot sightings, it's just a lot. And it just seems like, I mean, I don't think that there's one explanation that could explain all of this. So I would even love to hear you guys' take about like what could be causing each one of these phenomena, right? Like if it's multiple causes, like are people just imagining that they're seeing some kind of creature? Like, What do you guys think? What do you think? And I would especially love to hear from anybody that is from this area or who lives in Vermont in general, or maybe has family or something that lives there. If you've heard anything, if you know any stories, or if you believe that there is something weird going on at the Bennington Triangle. But thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. I do hope that you consider subscribing if you did enjoy it. I really appreciate it. I love making these videos for you guys, and honestly, it is my goal to be able to put out a lot more content as I grow. So it really makes a big difference, and I really appreciate this. So thank you so much if you do decide to subscribe. Just know that you're making my dreams come true. Anyway, I love you guys so much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you on the next one. Bye!